Hello, everyone.
Good evening.
I haven't seen you in how long? Before COVID?
Yes. Pre-COVID, we were
Pre-COVID.
texting, but we haven't seen each other for a long time.
We haven't seen each other for a long time, and you are such a dear friend, and I had the most amazing time doing a play with Carrie in 2019, wasn't it? And that was the last play I did, so it's so meaningful because today has been about, as you know, Carrie, has been about, we've got to say thank you to the Monobox and the Trouble Club for supporting and collaborating on the scheme, which is essentially getting together a group of amazing women who have come from different forms, mostly stage, and are looking to transcend the right word? No. Transition, thank you. You could be.
I like transcend.
To screen, which I know is something that we have in common, and I'm really looking forward to discussing it today. You were laughing outside at the word acclaimed in front of your name, and I laughed with you because you were laughing, but you are acclaimed, and I have this paragraph about Carrie, which I know already, but I'm just going to give you a brief overview in case anyone isn't familiar with all her work that she's done. And this is so inspirational because, firstly, the first sentence here is, you became artistic director of the Gate Theatre in 2007 at the age of 26, which is major, by the way, for a woman. I find my days filled with talking about women at the front line of pushing something forward, or being the lone journeyer in trying to get something made in a predominantly male industry, and how we all find our roots and we're all sort of in the same part of the same cause. And I really believe, like this room we were in together earlier, everybody's come from different spaces, but we're all doing the exact same thing, and we're all part of the same tribe. And there's no comparison. There's no, this person's worked for longer, or this person's done this or that. It's more like we're all pushing the movement forward, and it's so exciting. So I'm really, really glad that you're here to talk to us about how you did it. Because then you went on to be associate director at the Young Vic and in the Royal Court, and that was 7 years, wasn't it? And then in 2019 was it your first American production when you went and did Seawall with?
We took Doll's House to BAM, so I'd worked out there.
That's
and actually,
right.
I'd taken a student show out there, so I had done a bit of stuff out there. But yeah, obviously, it was the first time I'd made a show in New York.
In New York as well, with Jake Gyllenhaal and Tom Sturridge, and it was nominated for 4 Tony Awards. Again, major. Like every single one of the things she's done has just been like, oh yeah, and you were nominated for... we did our play together, and you worked tons at the National. I remember seeing The Deep Blue Sea, and everyone was devastated by that. It was really major. And Doll's House, we've mentioned. And opera as well now. So, you're obviously so between mediums. And the other thing I remember is that when we worked together on Miss Julie, and because it's mainly a two-hander, we talked so much because we were doing these rehearsals in this small room, and we were doing it, a lot of improvisation. You're so amazing at encouraging, and we were really close up to each other, and we were whispering sometimes, and we were having such a good time in this really small space. And you kept saying, oh my God, I wish I had a camera because it'd be so good to capture this. And then we got out to the Littleton Theatre, which is huge, and obviously, it's a really big space, and it's proscenium arch, isn't it? To use technical term. And I was nearly forgot it. I was like, all my theatres like the minute. And it was a whole different thing, because suddenly you were having to. It is a different technique. I've always found it different. I'm talking really fast, so I'm excited, so I'm going to slow down a bit. Then I remember film being so part of your language, and I remember you so. I just knew you were about to go and make a movie, and then of course you did, and you have your own company. So, because the theme of the day has been about transitioning, why don't we start there? Or maybe we should just start quickly, if that's okay, with you talking about these things I've talked about, your experience on stage, and how at 26 you became artistic director of a theatre, and then transitioned, and then made all this amazing work, and then now, of course, in every medium, and making your own movies. So we'll start with that, then we'll talk about the film stuff.
It's interesting how it all started so young. I guess I was directing as a kid. I mean, I was sort of making shows with my friends, and I always had that sort of innate appetite to live in a kind of imaginary world, I guess, but also to tell people what to do. And so I did that a lot, and I made a lot of work as a student, and I had a company with Ruth Wilson, actually, and some other actors when we were students, and we just began, I guess. And so I'd always sort of been running something and making things, and I got to London and I met a brilliant director called Natalie Abrahami, and we were at the National training together, and assisting and sort of trying to work out who we were and how we were going to make work. And she kept saying to people, I want to be a director. And I kept saying, let's just say we are directors. And so she went, okay, we'll say that. And then this job came up at the gate, and actually 2 women had run it before us, which was really important. So Thea Sharrock had run it just before us, and Stephen Daldry before that, and all sorts of people. And the applications had to go in, and we were umming and ahhing. And actually David Lan, who was a brilliant producer at the Young Vic, said to me, just go for it, just apply and just tell them what you want to do. And so we sort of dreamed up this weird plan. And we went in, and we were 26 and 27, and I'd never opened a play in London. And for some bizarre reason, they gave us the job. And then we were sort of thrown into it. And I've always really believed in sort of putting yourself in these impossible situations, and you sort of tend to work it out and make your way through. So we kind of grew up there, and we learned very publicly how to make theatre and how to run a theatre, and we made loads of mistakes and some terrible work, terrible work.
I have my fair
and
share.
some really great things that I'm really, really proud of, some of the things I'm most proud of. And we kind of learnt a lot about risk, I think, and some of the things that were most experimental were the things we were most proud of that got terrible reviews. But we sort of learnt, I guess, to try and hold on to trusting our own instincts, our own taste, looking at the thing on stage, both when you're making but also when you're producing, and believing somehow that if you respond to it and you believe in it and you think it's important, then an audience will. And that was kind of what I learnt in that phase. And I guess then that just took me through, you know, what's been a really joyful journey making theatre in London, and trying to sort of just keep digging into what I believe to be true if I imagine myself in the world of the thing that I'm making. And actually, you talking about Julie, that was the moment where I realised I needed to make film, because interestingly, what you bring is a sort of interiority and an acuteness to character, which is really extraordinary always in your work. But you can also play this enormous room. It's really hard, the Littleton, to play, and New did it so effortlessly. But in that moment, I thought, I don't want to be in this big room anymore. I want to be really close. I want to be in with the character. And I was sort of enjoying the scale of the mise en scène in a way, and the kind of opportunity that the set gave me and all of the work we were all doing together. But really, I wanted to be in that internal landscape. And so that was the point at which I just decided to try and stop making theatre, actually, in order to concentrate on film, which has been hard. And I've, you know, not worked as much over the last sort of 5 years, partly because of COVID, but because I've had to sort of pull out of theatre in a way to make that transition. But that I will always remember that rehearsal room and the feeling I had, which was suddenly it wasn't enough anymore, actually, to sort of be making in that way. And I wanted the scale, but I wanted the proximity. And so, yeah, it was interesting, I guess, to just try and follow that impulse.
Do you think that there was more of a space for women in theatre than in film when you began?
I sort of couldn't imagine being a filmmaker when I began. It felt I assisted a little bit. I sort of shadowed David Yates, who's a wonderful director, and I remember being on set with him and just thinking, the scale of this feels so far removed from me and my weird little brain imagining things, which was how I'd always made theatre. But at that point, I didn't feel able to make that transition, and so it was a really natural thing to just make theatre. And I never really thought about being a woman, and I never really thought about film at that point. I just kept following that kind of instinct, I guess. And so I don't know is the answer to that question.
It's just interesting, isn't it? Because I found that parts were much better, or rather I had better opportunities, way better. I found that if I ever got a script for something, it would be something about the way that, I don't know, it would be, if you weren't well known, the parts would be very bad, I found. And then these parts on stage would be like Miss Julia, would be, you know, like yours, like A Doll's House and Medea, and you have Deep Blue Sea, and these are all female-led, huge, big parts. And I just can't help but think it's not a coincidence that you as a woman choose these plays. You know, when Rufus says, "What do you want to do, Carrie?" Whatever, you know, you choose Miss Julie to do. So, and that in a way to me that's why just the importance of us as women pushing to create the stories that we want. Innately, it feels inherent that we'll choose. Many of them will be female stories, and so. It's interesting that you say you didn't think too much about being a woman, but all the work you created. I remember when I saw A Doll's House, I was so affected by Hattie's performance and by what you'd done. And it meant so much to me, and it inspired me so much. And oh my God, I'd love to play that part one day. Or, oh my goodness, I get to see a big female journey where she's complicated and she has her own thing rather than just being like the girlfriend of. I mean, the amount of times in film it was the girlfriend of. But I feel like it's really changing, and it's really changed since. And of course, for your first movie, you choose a female protagonist, like all your great female protagonists before. So how did you, from that rehearsal room in Julie, when I knew, I could tell, and we both wanted to make a movie of it there and then, didn't we, in the rehearsal room? It was really definitive for me as well. So how did, from that to then being on set on day one, what was that whole journey like for you between that? And obviously COVID was in the way. Yeah. And I do remember you saying, I could do 5 jobs this year, but I just can't, because otherwise I'll just be here and then doing this play and this play. So it must have been quite a journey to go, I'm going to say no to that because I have to forge my way into this other medium.
Yeah, I had this sense suddenly that I had to concentrate on film, otherwise it wasn't going to happen. And I get completely drawn under and absorbed into the world of everything I'm making, and I sort of go offline completely. I can't really interact with the real world at all. So every time I did that, I could feel the film ideas sort of slipping away, or I'd start developing something and then it would sort of dissipate. And I was developing a couple of really tiny, what I would describe as sensible first features, kind of micro, very, with lots of space for authorship. And for different reasons, one of them didn't go, and then COVID struck, and obviously the world stopped in so many ways, and the theatre industry completely shut down, and filming really at that point felt impossible. And then I got asked to pitch actually for Persuasion, which was really kind of quite a long way down the line in development, and it was financed and it had Dakota attached, and it was 3 months out from principal photography. And it was at the end of COVID, and I'd been just homeschooling my 3 children really unsuccessfully, and I was kind of it was pretty bleak. And I did 10 pitches in 10 nights to America from my bedroom with the door locked and the kids screaming, trying to get in normally.
For Persuasion?
Yeah.
10 different groups?
Just sort of, yeah, like the writer and the actor and the producers and then the other producers and then Netflix and then MRC and then, you know, so it just kind of kept going. And it was sort of I was elated because I'd just been locked in this sort of, as we all were in our weird breakdowns, you know, at home. And so then suddenly this project sort of was a go project and it was happening. And I think, you know, if I'd sort of applied my really rational brain, I might have put more questions in place in terms of whether that was the right first film to make. But I kind of applied my normal, like, just jump in, have a go, you'll crack it kind of philosophy. And so sort of found myself 3 months later on set in this big period movie, at quite a high budget level for a first film, with, you know, lots of amazing things to play with and a kind of, I guess, a faith on some level that I knew how to do it because it's sort of the same, although it's not at all. But, you know, the muscles are the same and the trusting the instinct is the same. And, you know, we made a thing and lots of people really love it and some people didn't love it. And it was quite kind of a conflicted process for me, if I'm really honest. And I learnt a lot, I think, about sort of how important the collaboration with the producer is and that everybody is trying to make exactly the same film. And I think at points on that process, we weren't all doing that. So there were kind of elements of the making that were quite shocking because obviously when I make theatre, I'm sort of, as we know, we're just given completely free rein and no one really interferes with us. So so that was a very fast, very big process, and I kind of look back on it slightly blinking and try and kind of unpack what happened. But, you know, I've done my first film and I will make another film, hopefully. So I kind of there was a lot of learning in it, and making a film in COVID was really difficult, as I'm sure you know. But the sort of total lack of intimacy was so interesting, because like when we were working together, there was so much improvising, and we were just connected. And for me, it's all about connection. Everything I make, it's like, who are you having the conversation with? And obviously being on set with a mask, and often we would like be on the beach in like double masked with sunglasses on and hats on, and like everyone else would be on the beach like in their bikinis, and we'd sort of all be standing there. And I think the conditions that you make work in affect what the work is. And one of the things I found hardest, I think, was that sort of lack of space for real human interaction outside of the shooting hours, which was, that was a kind of interesting challenge.
It is. That's a double whammy, isn't it? Because it's the space that's so different on set, but it's the same as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about too. The similarities and the transitioning, and what's similar and what's great. I remember when I first did my screen thing, I had no idea what was going on. And you're so right, because on stage, in the end, it's really the words on the page of the playwright and director and actor, and then the set comes in very last minute, Whereas suddenly you walk onto a set and there's machines and there's people fiddling with you just before you do a scene, or a tiny moment of a scene, rather than getting to play one whole thing out. And it was so markedly different that you get your costumes in just before, in dress rehearsals on stage, but the costumes come way before even rehearsal sometimes on film sets, or at least they're being paid a lot of attention to. So that I found really tough. And you're right, in COVID, I was doing a scene with an actor that I just met, actually, because COVID, we couldn't rehearse. And we were sort of like, hello, and I'll be them. And then suddenly we were on the sofa having a sort of argument in this long-term relationship, and then having a snog. I was sort of like, hello. So that's I can imagine as a director when you have the lead, but then you can't even see that must have been so challenging. And you talk about, I love this idea of stretching, this idea of, I'm going to take on the Gate Theatre because we've tried, we've applied, they've said yes, and we're just going to do it and see what happens. And it sounds like it's the same thing. You said you were just like, I'm just going to try and do it. And like the flex of that. And I wonder whether, someone said the other day, I had this quote, I think it was Denzel Washington, it was on Instagram or something, and he said that more progress comes from hardship than from ease. And that felt so good to hear, actually. It's so true, because when stuff's tough, you feel like, I just want to make this thing, it's not happening, or oh my goodness, will I ever, or this is so tough because I'm shooting my first movie and I have to wear 2 masks and I can't even see my lead actor when I'm giving them a note, That's really tough. But actually, I feel like there's a truth in the most growth comes from the hard things, not from the easy things. And if it were easy, perhaps you wouldn't progress nearly as much, and the graph of like what you learn on that. What do you think the key things were that you learned from the filmmaking process?
The DP said something brilliant to me, a wonderful guy called Joe Anderson, on the first day. And, you sort of, a couple of producers have said to me, you've got to just hold your shit together as you drive in, and you go past the tents and the COVID testing and all the trucks. And there's something about the kind of scale of that. And Joe just said to me, just think about what's in the rectangle. That's all that matters. And it was really good advice, because it was sort of, I guess, the version of what we find in theatre, which is this kind of acute concentration of being in a room together and it just being about that conversation. And so trying to kind of shut out, in a way, the scale of the mechanism around you, and to just think about what the shot is and how the actors are interacting in that moment and how you're interacting with them. And so I found that really releasing and concentrating. I guess the big difference for me in process terms was the importance of the producer. And I think in theatre, producing is about getting you to the point of making, and then you make. And I think a producer in film is your key collaborator in some ways, and they have to be completely bound into the process and the project, but also they have to be making exactly the same film as you. And I think if they're not, then this thing starts to sort of slightly dilute. And that was, we had brilliant producers on this, but by the nature of it, they were in process, it had momentum, the Netflix ambition was for a global film with a very big audience, a very broad audience. And so trying to kind of retain like an acuteness in terms of your own taste inside that process is really challenging. And so I think that was kind of my biggest takeaway about just making sure that there's an absolute shared vision, I guess, across all of the kind of key players in terms of what you're making, because there are so many points of infiltration when you're making a film. You know, there's the shooting, but then there's also the whole of the cut, and then there's all of the notes from the studio, and then there's the screening process, and then there's taste of music, and everybody's got to say on that, and everyone's got to say on what the grade is like, and you're trying all the time to just keep following your gut, because that's all directing can be, you know, which is like, what is my instinct, what's my taste, what do I think in this moment? But other voices crowd that. And so I guess in the best producer-director dynamic, the producer absorbs some of that and allows the director to sort of hunker into that taste more. So yeah, I think that was my biggest kind of takeaway.
And what did you learn about cinematography and that whole world? So, you know, when the machines come in, when before it's so about kind of guiding a scene and creating the whole flow and the breadth of a scene, a long scene, you know, on stage or longer. How was that?
Interestingly, that felt the most similar to me. I guess in theatre you're controlling a frame in a different way. You're controlling a big, big, wide frame in which an audience can look anywhere. So you have to kind of guide the eye all the time with light. And obviously on a cinema frame you can you're absolutely controlling the image and you're guiding the eye in a very different way. But oddly, it's the same, it felt to me like the same kind of muscle, weirdly. And so I just loved that part of it. I loved the kind of collaborating on kind of creating the shots and the detail of that, and the immediacy of just suddenly being in the space, and you've planned it and you've imagined it and you've storyboarded and you've shot listed, but then actually you're in the room and you have to make it work. And yeah, that was kind of, in a way, the place where I felt most in flow, I think.
And I know that you've been developing stuff, haven't you, since the beginning of COVID, pretty much. And how have you found that process? Because I know it's mostly for film, is it not? And TV.
Yeah, and theatre. I mean, I love development, and it's takes a really long time, as you know. And I find it to be a very kind of, I don't know, it's just much quieter, isn't it? And it's a really lovely different rhythm, and I really enjoy the sort of bookishness of that in a way, and the sort of obsession over each scene and the pages, and really thinking with the writer about what you're kind of trying to cook up and how to create tone and atmosphere. And I think the challenge for me has been that in theatre there's an immediacy and a definite, you know, you get dates normally, and then once you've got your dates locked in, you're moving towards that, and it's quite a quick turnaround. So it's sort of almost values like quite a sort of high speed methodology, and film by its nature is just so much more long form and much, much slower, and so there's a lot of patience required. And I think that can be quite frightening, because you're sort of untethering yourself from the sort of rhythm that you're used to. And I spend a lot more time alone now, which is not a bad thing, but it's been really challenging because I'm a sort of natural extrovert and I want to be with people all the time. And so actually, weirdly, that's been the hardest thing, is the sort of quietness of the long periods of development between projects in film.
And how do you pick your projects? Because to me, there seems like such a theme in your theatre work. Has that crossed over? Do you feel like it's similar? You're interested in similar kind of psychological character studies? How would you summarise what your development, and are you, because we've had such great conversations today, and one of the sessions earlier was about following the truth of what you really feel like you want to express, and that be more important than thinking about what might be popular or what might hit or what might be most watched, rather than something that you need, you know, you want to explore inside yourself and then in a group. Is that true for you, or do you feel like how is that? How does that sit with you?
I think I always... what tends to happen is I tend to make something, and then at the end of the process, or maybe a year after the process, I realise why I made it. And it's often a bit of therapy. You know, often I'll go, oh, I made Julie because I was working through this really weird relationship with someone who should remain nameless. But, you know, or you sort of get to the end of the thing and you go, oh, I made that about my dad actually somewhere, or it was about this piece of grief that I'm trying to kind of make sense of, or... You know, it's no surprise that when I first had children and was trying to be a director and have children, I was making lots of work about women in crisis with their children, Doll's House, Medea, you know, quite extreme versions of that story. Bit bleak. But, sorry, they're safe, they're all safe, someone's looking after them. But, you know, that sort of, there's something, I guess, charged or something that you feel an affinity to. And I read stories and I go, oh, I know who those people are. And I'm interested in her normally, and I want to make that 3D and real, and I'm always in a sort of therapeutic relationship with the play to some extent, without wanting to sound too weird about it. And it's exactly the same with film. You know, I'll read a book and just feel a kind of complicated connection to a piece of material, or sometimes I get sent screenplays, and it's very rare that I feel that I want to do them, but sometimes I'm working on something at the moment that actually was developed before I came on board, and it's a really thorny, complicated story about two women, and it just felt like it struck a lot of chords about my own kind of life and experience. So I guess I never really know why I pick projects, but you just somehow, they kind of start itching and they kind of take hold in you, and I always hope that I can direct it well. I guess you sort of can, you can see the film of it as you're reading it, normally immediately, if it's right. And if not, I just politely say, I'd be really crap at directing this, get someone else to do it, you know, because it's not for me. And I guess as I've got older, I've tried to just really trust that thing. And one of the women I trained with, Katie Mitchell, always used to talk about a cold pulse read and a hot pulse read. And she would say, when you first get sent something, it's like dating. You know, you're so thrilled to be sent it, and you sort of get a bit hot and flustered, and you're reading it thinking, oh my God, this could happen. You know, this is amazing. And then she would always say, you know, you've then got to sort of not drink any coffee and go and sit with it and really methodically do that cold pulse read and go, actually, what is the material? Is it the right material? Where are the weaknesses? And I kind of love the rigor of that, but I also think there's something in that hot connection, you know, that kind of immediacy that's often what ends up being most interesting in the project.
I remember when I started, there was, you know, you and Thea Sharrock and Katie you just talked about, and Marianne Williamson, and there was these like iconic theatre female directors, and they're all crossing over now, aren't they? Thea did her first movie as well. That was also a big studio film, wasn't it? And it gave me so much hope, you know, and made me believe that I could also potentially cross over to screen, and how would that look? And I remember before that, it used to be quite segregated. It would be hard to make that crossover, and now it's more and more, I think, you know, and I know that you were getting approached loads, actually, while we were doing Julie, I remember, by people wanting you to direct things, and it was the thing that, you know, it was gonna light you up, that you were gonna do, I knew. Someone in a session earlier, I think it was Molly actually, a filmmaker, said that about being a director, she said, you know, you have to be a really good shock absorber for stress. And it's so true, actually, I think, the more I think about her saying that, because, and I felt utterly like this with you. I just could never see you feel stressed. I mean, I don't think I saw you feel stressed, and you must have been so stressed. Because no one's not stressed when they're putting on a play. I mean, the whole thing is stress. So do you feel that to be true? And what would be your wisdom and advice on being a leader in these spaces, whether it's on set or in a play? And as a woman, do you feel, which, I mean, I will always ask you this because I find it so interesting. As a female director and leader within the small group of women that were doing it and now are crossing over, what would be your advice about that, and what's your experience and what have you learned?
I mean, 99% of directing is holding your shit together, I think. It's really frightening. You know, everyone knows that, I think, who does it. It's, I mean, sort of frightening is the word. I don't mean that dramatically, like it's really sort of your worst nightmare at times.
I mean, it's a nightmare, isn't it?
Really hard.
It's a nightmare for an actor, but for a director, it blows my mind.
I think when I started, I was so anxious and sort of wrought with anxiety, and I somehow believed that that was essential to make the work good. And then I realised that in that state, which is basically fight or flight, right, where you're in this kind of totally adrenalised, really high anxiety, trying to keep your shit down sort of phase, it's actually very hard, for me anyway, to be creative or to have organic, connected thoughts to what you're seeing. So it's easy to do that and kind of come in and go, right, this is what I planned in my bedroom last night, and you're going to do it like this, and you're going to stand by the window, and then the light's going to do that, and then we're going to shoot it this way, you know. But if you actually are trying to have a relationship with the thing you see in front of you, or sort of make in any playful way, you sort of have to get out of that and try and find a way to relax into it. And I found that harder on the film set at first because it was just a big operation, and we had quite a unusual amount of crisis related to COVID, a lot of shutdowns. We shot 5 scenes with body doubles. We shot 10 scenes, I think, with not all the actors there. I mean, we had all sorts of COVID closures. And so there was sort of quite a lot of white-faced producers walking towards me mid-shoot, kind of looking physically sick, going, do we recast tonight or do a head replacement? I mean, it was that kind of stuff every day. And I guess what was lovely was the years of theatre had somehow taught me how to do that shock absorbing. But it's still the biggest challenge, I think, and I would have to just take myself off to the loo or have a cigarette and just sort of try and go, forget about it. What's the stay playful, stay in the room, stay in the moment with the people that you're making with. And I guess over the years, I've sort of come to believe that if you can be like that, then hopefully you can let other people feel free and feel playful and get rid of their own anxiety, because something a bit magic happens if you're all trying to make the same thing and everyone's sort of attached to their child somehow. Or like, that sounds a bit odd, but they're kind of in a space of free association. And I think for me, the sort of managing stress and managing anxiety is all about trying to shove that to one side so we can let that atmosphere happen in some way. But I'm not always very good at it.
There's this, it making me think, it's actually not that related, but of a great quote that says something like, I've learnt so much from my mistakes, I'm thinking about making a few more. And I think it's really, I suppose I have spoken about this idea of, things being difficult or tough and learning so much from that. What do you think, have you learnt a lot from how you would view as mistakes, and has that been instrumental to all this amazing success that you've had, or have there been none?
Loads of mistakes I've made, I think everyone does. I guess what's nice is when terrible things happen, you recover from them, and then you realise it's like, doesn't matter. Because actually the worst fear, I remember when I was super anxious in my 20s when I was at the Gate and I had a bit of therapy, and I remember speaking to a therapist, she said, what's the worst case outcome, genuinely, what's the worst case outcome? And I was like, maybe like a 1-star review. And she was like, okay, so it's not that bad, is it? And you sort of go, oh yeah, that's because the fear of the crisis, the fear of failure, the fear of like not living up to your own expectation is so overwhelming. And then, of course, when that does happen occasionally, like you get sort of smacked in the face and you kind of bounce back and you feel a bit sad for a few days and then you move on. And maybe at that point you realise that the terror is not worthwhile, or is sort of smaller than it might have first have seemed. So that's probably, each time you make a big mistake, I think you sort of somehow come out with, it's like, how do you help that? How do you let that make you more confident, not less confident somehow?
I remember once me having a real, just like that, a real something, I can't remember exactly what it was. And I think it was my mum or something. And I was like, oh my goodness, everyone's going to think, I've messed this up. And I remember being like, there's not a boardroom meeting on Saturday morning about your mistake with like 50 people discussing what you did exactly. And in your mind, there is. And I suppose it's when you suddenly realise that it's your relationship to you, and perhaps how quickly you can forgive yourself when those things happen, or be compassionate or like easygoing on yourself rather than you be your worst critic of those things. And so if you looking back, to have made all this work, what do you think, what was the thing that took you from before all of it and the vision that you must have had, or at least the sensation or the feeling that you had to do it? What do you think was the thing that kept you going? From nothing to all of this, if you know what I mean.
I think it's like an addiction. It's the only way I can describe it. I mean, it's so awful when you're doing it, often. There's a few people here I've made work with and they know what I mean. You know, it's really painful, and we all, you know, it sounds pretentious, but we all experience that, I think. I don't know. I've just always wanted to do it so much, all the time. And it's one of the, as I was just saying about the solitude of film development, one of the things that's hard for me is the not making. There's more time not making. And I realised that my life makes sense when I live half in my real life and half in a fantasy kind of reality, like a imagined. And you get in the shower and I'm often a character, and I'm thinking about how that character moves through the room, and I'm imagining what the colour of the walls would be in their bedroom. And, you know, I sort of live in this weird space there. And so for me, with film, when it's not definite and when you're not kind of committed to a project because you don't know if it's definitely going to happen, it's harder for me in advance to sort of slip under in that way. And, that straddling has always been the thing that's driven me to just do the next thing. I made some really conscious, I guess you would say quite ambitious decisions about scale quite early on, after I did Doll's House at the Young Vic, and I sort of set myself quite a clear target, and I just said, I want to be directing in the main spaces at the National within 3 years or whatever. And so I don't know where that came from, but I just decided to do that. And I think with all these things, if you know what you want, people can help you, and then you can sort of articulate what you want, and then people do try and help you, I think, if you can say clearly. So that helped, I think.
Say clearly, as in state what it is that you want to do.
I want to do this in this way.
I want to do this, yeah.
I want to do this in this way. And you keep saying it.
Even if someone's like, no, not you, just go, okay, next person. Yeah, I think that's a really good time to open it out for anyone to ask any questions of Carrie and her journey, everything. Should we take this one here?
Thank you. That's great to hear about your experience of storytelling and how you keep that momentum. My question relates to failure and how do you deal with rejections if you're pitching yourself for something and this time it's not the right fit? What do you turn to if it's, you know, books or like particular films to kind of regroup, or how do you process that and sit with that rejection? That's my question.
I guess a bit like what I was just saying about trying to, I guess I try and stay clear about what I want, and if someone else doesn't want that, then it's not right. Do you know what I mean? And so then I kind of go, well, now what do I want? Which isn't a very good answer, because I guess rejection's really hard because it makes you feel like what you want isn't the right thing, and that's the trap, you know, because actually if you can kind of keep going back in and going, what am I interested in, then that should be the thing that sort of drives you, and then it's about trying to find your partners to make that real with. Yeah, I think it's that.
Oh, sorry. What do you say, both of you, to the suggestion that women aren't funny, and secondly, that women think small, they don't think big Star Wars? How would you answer that criticism?
I know. So the first one was funny, not funny. I think that's just, I don't even understand who says that. I need to have words instantly. I mean, I think that like most genre spaces, it's been dominated just from opportunity-wise by, of course, you know, a male-led industry. And if I think about, oh God, we've been talking about the rom-com recently, haven't we, Lauren? And talking about what is the modern day version these days of that, because all the ones we grew up on, and even like the more recent ones like Wedding Crashers or whatever, it's always like the pretty girl that the guy gets in the end and he's all over the place and she's so pure and sweet. And, you know, I don't think there's been enough opportunity. And I think partly it's because women haven't been financed enough, and you haven't got enough female writers writing about their experience that happens to be funny. Just because it happens to be human. I mean, that's my sense of humour. It's always like finding the human mess of it all. It doesn't really matter whether you're a man or a woman. It's the mess of being a human, and it's really fucking funny. So that, I disagree with that. And in terms of the scale thing, again, what I'm excited about is what is our version of that. We don't have to come in and do Star Wars. We have to come in and do what our version of a big story is. Because that is the space to me, and that's why I feel so excited to be a woman, honestly, because I'm like, oh my goodness, we get to tell these stories that haven't been in cinematic history before. There was an event years ago I was at, and a big director got up on stage and he listed his 50 favourite moments from cinema history. He went through all of them. And then Helen Mirren got up and said there wasn't one female director on that list. And the room went silent because I didn't even think of it because it hadn't ever been pointed out to me. And suddenly you have Helen Mirren standing up who's able to say that's actually, we should be ashamed of the fact that the 50 biggest moments in cinema, none of them have been authored by a woman, and it's our time to author. And I'm so excited about it. So I think there's going to be bigger and bigger things. I just don't think there'll be Star Wars, but it might be something even better. Yeah, exactly. There's loads of women coming into it now, which is also fantastic. But you know, there's things to be created from us, and that's why I think we're all here in the room.
Thank you, Carrie, about all those stories about what you have done and what you. It's now my question would be, what sort of story would you wish next to do? I mean, obviously you have got something, or several things, but do you want new stories or adapted novels? What's your dream?
Oh, that's a lovely question. I feel like I need to go back and make my first film because I missed it. I sort of made a second film first, so the things I'm developing are quite dreamlike, very visual, all centered around women. I've got 2 films I'm working on. One is about a group of 3 sisters who live on an island, and it's a sort of quite odd and particular world. So yeah, in film terms, I'm trying to kind of go back and find something that feels more acutely me in a way. And then theatre is, its own gift, and I'm working on lots of classics. I tend to go back to classics. Over the years, I've done a lot of plays about women written by men, interestingly, because the canon presents them, so all the plays you've listed. And it's kind of complicated because lots of those characters are really specific and brilliant, but you're kind of trying to bring, I guess, a feminist lens to that work. And I'm working on a production of Carmen at the moment to do as an opera, and it's a really complicated piece about femicide, ultimately, but it's kind of glorified and romanticised to be a piece about passion and sex and male fantasies, really, about women. And it's really hard. It's like one of the hardest things I've ever done because I'm trying to put this kind of feminist lens onto that material, and it's not in the DNA of the music or the libretto. And so there's a sort of fight, I guess, happening between me and Bizet at the moment. It's quite ugly. So, yeah, I guess a lot of the things I'm working on are sort of still grappling with the same themes about women and their kind of complex journeys in different ways, yeah.
Before you go in, before you start your first day, have you done research and thought, this is what I want the character to be like? Do you research about the playwright? Do you see what happens on the set or on the stage and respond to that? How do you develop those characters in your work?
I plan a lot. I'm quite square in that way. I make a lot in conversation, so I love collaborating. I have long meetings with the people with the designer, with the writer, with the cinematographer if I'm making a film, with the actors if possible. But then there's also like the private time where you burrow down and you sort of imagine, and I try and write these long documents where I do a kind of storyboard in theatre, and then it turns into a shot list in cinema, and in that I'm trying as much as possible to sort of have an idea for every moment of what I'm going to make, because then I feel I can be free and responsive and take from improvisation, and I get the actors to improvise a lot if that's possible. Vanessa was extraordinary. She was just improvising for hours and hours and hours, and so much of that material came into the show, didn't it? Which was felt really free. But I had also kind of a plan for everything in case we got stuck. So and then I do a lot of backstory work. I tend to work out who the characters are and where they've grown up, and all that kind of geeky stuff. And I sort of try and build like a whole community for who the people are, so that I know that when we go in, and then normally all of that's thrown away and the actors bring loads of stuff, but at least I have a sense. But I basically sit in a very specific pub in Tufnell Park, where I met Prasanna the other day for lunch. And all the shows I've made have been made in that pub, and I just sit on my own with my headphones on, and I just read the play over and over and over, or read the screenplay over and over and over until I feel like I know what it is in me, and I'm confident enough to play then, I guess. Yeah.
You talked about how you don't want your kind of vision diluted with the producers. I was just wondering, how do you protect your vision and voice while still kind of making movies? And what are the things you actually do make compromises on?
I missed the middle bit of the question. So
You were talking about you're protecting your vision and your voice. How do you do that without sort of losing it? And the compromises you make, how does that work in terms of keeping your vision?
It's a really good question. I don't know. I think I compromise because I'm a pragmatist, and I'm sort of... So, like, I'll compromise on whether the plate is blue or navy blue. I guess you get further into it and you realise some decisions don't matter. You just have to make a decision. I know that sounds kind of glib, but you just have to, like, in the moment, make decisions really fast so other people can respond to them. And then there are other decisions that are completely essential and cannot be compromised on, and are sort of about who you are in this moment in relationship to the material. So I find if you're like quite easy to work with and you sort of let other people win at certain points when it doesn't seem very important, then maybe it allows you to really, really protect. Making is compromise. It's collaboration. It's limited resources. There's never enough money. There's never enough time. So you've sort of got to work out what are the things that really, really matter to you and how to sort of ring fence those, I guess. I think.
We do have some questions online. So from people online, Carrie, was it hard to go from theatre to film production?
I think it's a similar muscle set, but it's like long distance running to sprinting. I don't know if you know what I mean when I say that, Vanessa. Particularly for actors, I think, because as an actor in theatre, you've got to do the whole marathon, haven't you? Every night, 8 times a week, you've got to sort of hold the entire journey. But whereas when you're filming, you sprint, don't you, for a moment, and then you pause, and then you put it down, and then you go again. And that was the biggest change, I guess, for me, was it's the same muscles. Do you know what I mean? But you're just using them in a different way. So you're still telling a story, and you're trying to tell that story visually, and you're trying to respond to the material truthfully, and you're managing in the same way. But the mechanism, the structure makes you operate differently, I guess.
Also, just you made me think, it's it seems to me that the biggest skill in film is letting go more, because as soon as the scene's done, you have to let it go. Whereas in theatre, you can come back to it the next day and just, oh, God, Tuesday night was awful. Let's try and get it better on Wednesday. But with film, it's gone. I struggle with that so much. I'd replay the scene in my head, and so you just have to let it go, let it go, let it go. Or if you didn't get the shot that you wanted because whatever, or it's shut down because of COVID, so you couldn't film in that location. I mean, it's just so much about just letting go in present moment, just releasing that.
It demands a presentness, I think, and there's a sort of intensity to that immediacy, isn't there? Which is, in this moment, is this the best possible decision we can make together right now, and then it's over. And I think that is quite different to the sort of weird excavation opportunity there is in theatre sometimes. Yeah.
Hi. First of all, I really appreciate both of your works. I'm a big fan. My question is in your relationship, like actor, director, how does that change in theater and with film? Like, how would you feel is the hardest part of that relationship? And I'd say, I guess, the most fulfilling as well?
I think part of the reason why I was so thrilled when Carrie was crossing over and doing film, and the other theatre directors I'd worked with were crossing over, is because I guess in theatre you're so used to rehearsal, which is essentially pre-prep, and it took me quite a long time to realise that you have to have your own individual process in film, because not everyone is in the rehearsal room for 6 weeks, working out what the play is and discussing it, having time. Most of the time, the director is so busy making sure that all the other things they have to be in charge of, which is everything, is in order, and might not, doesn't have 6 weeks, the luxury of that. So I've learned to try and recreate my process somehow to the best of my ability. It's not always possible, especially in COVID. Now, hopefully better, but to recreate that rehearsal process. And so now I really try and look for directors that understand that and want to go on that journey, because some haven't come from theatre and so don't really understand, and some actors don't need it. But as a theatre actor for so long, I really struggled. So I always look for that, and I think because so many people in the room here are coming from theatre and thinking about film, it won't be the same because you don't have a rehearsal room. But try if you can. I think it just benefits everything so much, more than anything, for relaxation. Stressful enough, like you say, that moment between action and cut, so stressful, and it is what it is, and then it's gone. And it's the same thing when you do your first preview or second preview and you feel sick and you have to get through it. And the only thing you've got to hold on to is the relationships you have with each other and how relaxed you are and how much you trust each other. So try and create those things, whatever possible, as soon as you can, and immerse and just like lean in, I'd say.
It's interesting because in a film process, the rehearsal is sort of the cheapest part of the process, if you think about it. And it's very expensive when you're shooting because everybody's there and you've got all your equipment and the clock is ticking. And so it strikes me as really odd not to do it, and if you can. And we had 2 weeks on the film that I did, which wasn't masses, but it did mean we touched on every single scene before we got to the shooting day, which I loved. It just gave me a kind of feeling of, it felt more like a rehearsal because we were coming back to something always, and we'd made some decisions about the sort of, the shape of the scene. But yeah, I mean, it's very different, but it is also the same, which is actors are managing a lot of fear and a lot of stress. And I think a big part of directing is how to make people feel good about what they're doing and to be encouraging and to kind of understand that vulnerability, because it's a wild and difficult thing to put yourself out there, isn't it? And kind of, and try and be honest so that they feel like they're being seen and that their work is being seen. And that's a really big part of what I find interesting in directing, which is you did it like this and this means this and what about this, and to ask those questions rather than, I think my sense is a lot of actors on film feel very alone and they're just being shot and they don't quite know what they're doing, or they're just trying things, or they're sort of and that there's not a lot reflecting back at them. And I think that can be really frightening, can't it? Sometimes it's fine, but you've got to be very, very sure of your own work, I think, if you're not getting anything. Yeah.
And we do have another online question. And so, how have you managed to balance family life with your work, especially given the intensity of diving into a project?
I don't know. I mean, it's chaos. They're great. I don't know. I never know what to say. It's really hard. And one of the great things I think about directing is I sort of go deep in, but then I have big gaps between. And I haven't done loads of work. I've just tried to do things I really love. So there's a bit of space between the projects where I can try and be like a semblance of a normal human. And yeah. I mean, kids are good because they sort of tell you everything and they tell you what to do. So they weirdly like make all the choices much easier. Yeah. Anyway, you have to ask them that.
Hi, thank you so much for your input. I really enjoyed the parts where you mentioned how you deal with stress, that you go for a cigarette and then you have a chat with yourself. And I'm just wondering, besides, you mentioned that you talk to yourself and you remind yourself to stay playful and to stay with people in the room. Do you have any other mantras that you use in stressful situations and possibly when you feel not good enough? I'm not sure if this happens to you anymore. I'm sure you had this in the past at the beginning of your career. So yeah, if you have any mantras, that would be really helpful. Thanks.
I did a really woo-woo thing. I did a Tony Robbins course. Have you heard of him? He's a kind of life coach. Yeah. Someone told me to go and do it. And the big thing in that is you build up to walking over hot coals on the last night. And he does it by getting 10,000 people to chant cool moss repeatedly, like in the Excel Centre. It's kind of wild. So everyone you put your bags down, you take your shoes off, and you walk in a kind of cult-like way, going cool moss, and you imagine that you're walking on cool moss. And then you walk over hot coals, everybody does it, and you don't burn yourself, and then you come out, it's great, it's really cool. Anyway, so I told my assistant on the film about this, and so when it was really spiraling, he would just turn around really quietly and go, cool moss. And I would just sort of take myself to space, and I would normally be in a portaloo or like somewhere in the wood hiding, and I would just sort of say, cool moss. And there's something, and it sounds weird, but there's something really grounding about the floor always in these moments. And I'm not joking when I say directing is a lot about just keeping yourself together. And often if you can get through that moment, on the other side is the work again and the interesting conversation. It's just the sort of point of crisis and the point of anxiety. So yeah, cool moss was my thing. But.
Also, I don't know if it ever goes away. It hasn't gone away for me. I think, just to add to that, because you just made me think that, I think that the best thing I got taught was learn to identify how you speak to yourself, about yourself. Your main relationship in life is you, number one. In our industry, so much of it is about other people's opinions, what they think, whether they think it's good enough, and therefore whether you think it's good enough. I found I had to learn to parent myself. Imagine I was talking to a 5-year-old, because the worst I realized was how I would talk to myself. And if you can start to identify how you're speaking to yourself, and would you speak to one of your best friends in the world, like how you might speak to yourself, and learn to identify that voice, and then if it happens, start choosing to be kinder and more compassionate, to be like, it's okay, I got you, it doesn't matter, like, we're okay. Like, talk to yourself like you're the best parent you could possibly be to yourself. And that is everything, because you can't control the hot coals. You can control your relationship to yourself as you go over them. There will always be hot coals. And there will never not be that voice in your head going like, what are you doing? But we're all creatives, and creative is dangerous and, risky, and so much about failure. I mean, I thousands of times I've had no's and rejections and felt terrible. And it's only me being like, come on, old girl, let's go, And that's really the thing that exists. Jobs come and go. There's no career trajectory like that. Everything's like this and then this. And it's just the constant is you with you. So that's the thing.
Thank you so much. To Carrie, where lies for you the most significant difference between writing/directing for stage and film? Have you any advice for typical pitfalls beginners should avoid who want to work in both worlds?
I guess I think it's what I've articulated, which is about the time frame and about the patience required in film. it's these sort of long swathes of development, and then the process itself is so, you make a film when you're prepping it, when you're shooting it, when you're editing it, and then in the sort of final stage of post, and then you're promoting it, and you just have this long relationship with the material. And I guess the biggest thing is to make sure that you're kind of completely in love with that idea at the beginning, so that you can sustain that relationship with the material the whole way through. I think that's probably my biggest tip.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this wisdom. It's really awesome. I was wondering, the industry at the moment is entirely dominated by cis people. So every director, every producer, every commissioner, every reviewer for theatre, like every theatre boss, everyone's like entirely cis. Almost every cast in a West End show, almost every cast in any feature film, it's always cis people, and it seems like that's so dominant that a lot of cis people don't even notice that. And I was just wondering, I know you're not trans yourself, but like, do you have any advice for just like keeping going and just like pushing on the door when it so often feels like we're just not welcome? Like I've had theatres just explicitly tell me like, we don't work with trans people at all. And as illegal as that is, people will just do it. So like, do you have any advice for just like keeping going when just so often the answer is just like no, and the door is just slammed?
I'm sorry, that's really hard.
It's not your fault. But thank you.
It's a really good provocation. I hope the world is starting to change, isn't it? And I think that we are recognising the profound impact that different stories have, and I think that's why, hopefully, who gets to make is starting to shift, and I feel really optimistic about that. And I guess I would say to you, as I would sort of have said to my younger self, try and get as good as you can at your own craft and your own work, and feel as proud as you can about what you want to make and how you're going to make it, and then keep going, and keep finding those partners, because I think the world needs, the appetite is there now, although it still feels quite unformed, and we still hear shocking stories like yours, but the more your work can be, the more true to that you can be, I think probably the more the world will respond to it. That's certainly been my experience, which is very different from yours, I'm sure. But it's like, get fit, get good, get clear, learn to love the way you make work, and learn to love what you've got to make, and then tell the world really clearly about it. And I feel optimistic that the doors are ready to shift, but there's something about sort of, I don't know, taking ownership and responsibility for your own material and how you want to express that. That's all I can say. I don't know.
Time for one more? Yeah. Sorry, I'm aware you guys are giving the mic, so I can't always pick.
Thank you so much to both speakers. My name is Dylan. I'm a law student turned software engineer. And at the age of 16, I actually did direct and star in my own student film. It was a revenge story called Payment Protection Ice Cream. Not a very good film, but it taught me a lot about creativity. My question for Carrie is, between filmmaking and theatre, which do you think is the superior medium? I.e., which one best captures the audience's imagination? Personally, I prefer films. And for Vanessa, what's the hardest scene you've ever had to film in? Thank you.
You have to go first, 'cause I don't know what the answer is.
The hardest thing I've ever had to film? It's kind of probably a mixed answer. I think we had to, in a film I had to do this scene with a woman giving birth, and it was one take with no cuts, and I haven't given birth before, and I was so scared, and I was daunted, which I think why fear is really important, because it just puts you into places where you have to do something, or else nothing will happen. And I just thought, I can't fake a second of this, because if I do, most women, who've given birth partners that have watched them, I mean, it would just, in a second, you'd be out of it and you wouldn't believe it because you can't cut it. So I would have thought that would have been the hardest thing, but actually it was the most beautiful experience of my life. And I was thinking about it as you were speaking earlier, because when you were saying these big long stretches rather than the sprints, and it was like doing a play. So it was just amazing. She didn't have the interference. So weirdly, I actually would answer that question now and say the really short scenes where you have to do something, if that birth scene had been cut up into tiny moments when, someone's fiddling with the light and you're having to go over here and you've got this prosthetic hanging off and you're trying to, cover, and then someone's over there and then you have lunch and feel a bit sick after it and you're coming back and then suddenly you're on the bed pretending to push out a baby. Like, the whole thing is mad. And so actually it was such a gift being uninterrupted. And the hardest thing I find is to try and be alive in a really short moment when you've got, like Ridley Scott films with 8 cameras, and there's the machines everywhere, and you're just trying to do a moment where you're dying or whatever it might be. And so those are really hard. So I'd say on that basis, just as you were saying, Carrie, anything that can help everybody on set. If you guys are creating stuff, try and find the way that helps you feel most relaxed, whatever that is. And if you're stressed, that's also totally cool. Be relaxed with being stressed. Be okay with being whatever you're in. And create that, and create a collaborative, unified, loving place, I would say, to create work to the best of your ability, to help those moments feel like they could be an extension of one long thing, basically. Because that's what I crave. I crave for an environment that helps me go to places, even if it's action, cut, like that, in between that phase. Weird answer.
I mean, I feel a bit of a betrayer saying this, but I think cinema is sorry. I guess when I think back in my own life, the times that I've been completely changed, particularly as an early, cinema goer, and there are these kind of shattering, completely paradigm-changing moments for me that are all from film. But I would say that at the end of COVID, I had such a hunger to be back in a room. And I think what's interesting now is we watch film a lot at home, don't we? And we watch a lot of films in terrible ways on our phones and our iPads. But there's something about the community of being in a room. And I think particularly my favourite theatre is the Young Vic, and it's a 450-seat theatre. And there's some thesis that most people can have a sort of outward community of up to 400 people that you can have some kind of proper relationship with. So I always think when you sit in that room with 450 people, it's like a village, an old-fashioned kind of community. And it's a completely ancient need to sit in a room and be changed by a story in that way. And that's why I still love going to the cinema and try and go, and even sometimes just go on my own on, Wednesday afternoon when it's raining, and just kind of, there's something about the communal activity, isn't there, of sharing story and being changed in that way and laughing together. And so obviously that happens more in theatre. But I think for me, the form of film probably wins out.
I think that's why it's so important that theatre makers make film, I think, to try and recreate that experience. And I always remember writing in my little journal years ago, being like, how can we bring stage to the screen? And that feels like a perfect note to end on, Carrie, because you do embody that. And I know everyone here is also really interested in that journey. And it's been so inspiring, and I think you're so magic, and it's so nice to see you. And thank you, everyone, for being here with us, and particularly this acclaimed, stunning director. Thank you.